Romeo Castellano had built his empire on the principle that fear was currency and loyalty was blood. But when he turned his key in the penthouse lock at midnight to find his maid with terror carved into her features and one desperate word trembling on her lips, hide, he realized that some currencies had expired. Annabelle pressed her finger to her mouth with such frantic urgency that Romeo's hand instinctively moved toward the Glock holstered beneath his tailored jacket. Don't make a sound. Her whisper cut through the darkness like a blade. They'll hear you. In Romeo's world, men whispered about him, not to him. He was the Cobra, the one whose name alone emptied rooms and settled debts. He'd spent 15 years building an empire where his word was law and his presence was power. Yet something in Annabelle's eyes, pure terror wrestling with fierce determination, made him freeze mid-step. What the hell? He started, his voice dropping to that deadly register his enemies knew meant violence was seconds away. Her hand shot out, gripping his forearm with surprising strength for someone who spent her days folding his clothes and polishing his floors. She pulled him sideways, away from the living room entrance, into the shadows near the hallway that led to his private study. If you walk in there right now, you're dead. Her voice trembled, but her grip remained iron. We have maybe 10 minutes before they realize you came home early. The word detonated in Romeo's mind like a flashbang. He'd left Marco at the docks an hour ago, overseeing the shipment that had arrived ahead of schedule. He'd come home to his empty penthouse, to silence and expensive whiskey and the solitude he'd earned through blood and calculated ruthlessness. From deeper in the penthouse, from his own living room, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Voices. Not television. Not neighbors through the walls. Voices. Multiple voices engaged in conversation, the kind of low, serious tones that accompanied business. His business. In his home. Annabelle's other hand clamped over his mouth, just as Romeo's muscles tensed to move forward. Her brown eyes, usually downcast and forgettable, now blazed with an intensity that reminded him of soldiers he'd known, the kind who'd seen death and learned to dance with it. Romeo. She said his name. Not Mr. Castellano. Not Sir. Just Romeo, spoken with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned the right through knowledge he didn't yet possess. Trust me for 60 seconds. Please. No one called him Romeo except his mother, God rest her, and Dante, his brother, who'd been dead for 3 years. Everyone else used his title, his surname, his reputation. But Annabelle spoke it like a prayer, and against every instinct screaming in his head, Romeo nodded. They moved through his penthouse like ghosts, Annabelle leading him along routes he walked every day, but now felt foreign, dangerous. She knew exactly which floorboards creaked, which shadows provided cover. When they reached the edge of the living room, she positioned him behind the marble column he'd imported from Italy, the one that cost more than most people earned in a year. Then she pointed. Through the gap between column and wall, Romeo saw his dining table. The 12-seat custom piece where he'd hosted exactly 3 dinners in as many years, now crowded with men. His brain catalogued faces with the efficiency of 15 years in the underworld. Vincent Marchetti, head of the Marchetti family. Carlo De Luca, who controlled the docks. Sal Torino, the Bronx. Men who should be enemies, competitors, threats to each other's territories. And at the head of Romeo's table, in Romeo's chair, sat Marco Vitelli, his underboss, his brother's best friend, the man Romeo had trusted with his life, his empire, his secrets for 12 years. Marco's tattooed hands spread across Romeo's table like he owned it, his smile easy and confident as he addressed the assembled vultures. Gentlemen, Marco's voice carried clearly, each word a knife sliding between Romeo's ribs. Thank you for coming. As I said, Romeo won't be home until 3. That gives us plenty of time to finalize how we're dividing his territory after tonight's unfortunate accident. Romeo's vision tunneled. The Glock felt like molten metal against his ribs. Every instinct, every lesson learned in blood and fire, screamed at him to walk into that room and end them all. He'd done it before. Walked into rooms full of armed men and walked out alone. Marco leaned back in Romeo's chair, laughing at something Vincent said. The best part, he never saw it coming. The Cobra, so focused on external threats that he never noticed the viper in his own nest. Dante would have appreciated the irony. Dante, his brother's name in that traitor's mouth, ignited something nuclear in Romeo's chest. Annabelle's hand found his again, her grip the only thing anchoring him to sanity. In the shadows, she turned him to face her, and Romeo saw something in her expression that cut through his rage like ice water. Knowledge. This woman, this quiet, forgettable maid who'd worked in his home for 6 months, knew. She'd known, and she'd been waiting for this exact moment. If you're listening to this story and feel your heart racing, feel that cold recognition of betrayal and survival, take a moment to subscribe so we can continue bringing you these powerful stories every single day. And if it's not too much to ask, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because knowing this story has reached you, wherever you are, means everything to us. We need to move, Annabelle breathed against his ear, her voice steady despite the death waiting 30 feet away. There's a panic room you don't know exists. I need to show you something before you go in there and get us both killed. Romeo Castellano had built an empire on never taking orders from anyone. But as Marco's laughter echoed from his living room and his brother's name hung in the air like an accusation, Romeo made a choice that would either save his life or end it. He nodded and followed the maid who knew too much into the darkness of his own home. Annabelle's fingers moved across a section of wall paneling in the hallway that Romeo had walked past 1,000 times. A soft click, and the panel swung inward, revealing a space that shouldn't exist according to every blueprint Romeo had reviewed before purchasing this penthouse. Inside. Now. Her voice left no room for argument. The panic room was barely 10 feet square, walls lined with monitors Romeo had never authorized, equipment he'd never purchased. 3 screens flickered to life as Annabelle tapped a keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, many times before. How long has this? Romeo started, but his words died as the center monitor focused on his living room in crystal clarity. Marco stood now, his movements relaxed as he gestured to a map spread across Romeo's dining table. The map showed New York divided into colored sections like a child's board game, each territory marked with names Romeo recognized. DeLuca, you'll absorb Romeo's dock operations, Marco said, his tone casual, as if discussing dinner plans rather than dismantling 15 years of Romeo's blood and strategy. The shipping routes, the warehouses, the protection contracts, all yours. Fair compensation for your cooperation tonight. Carlo DeLuca nodded, his thick fingers tracing the waterfront sections. And the Cobra's cash reserves? Split equally after we liquidate his offshore accounts. Marco's smile was the same one he'd worn at Dante's funeral, standing beside Romeo as they lowered his brother into the ground. I've had access to his passwords for 2 years. Moving the money will take 48 hours, which is why tonight's timeline is critical. 2 years. The number struck Romeo like a physical blow. 2 years of planning, of positioning, of playing the loyal soldier while sharpening the knife for Romeo's back. Vincent Marchetti leaned forward, his scarred face catching the light. And you're certain about the brother? Romeo's entire body went rigid. Annabelle's hand found his shoulder. A warning or comfort, he couldn't tell. Marco's expression shifted, something almost resembling regret flickering across his features before vanishing. Dante was a necessary sacrifice. The kid was too soft, asking too many questions about going legitimate. Romeo would have eventually listened to him, and we couldn't have that. The car accident was clean. No one suspected. The monitors swam in Romeo's vision. His hands, tattooed and scarred from 15 years of violence, trembled against his thighs. Dante, his little brother, who died 3 years ago when his brakes failed on a rain-slicked highway. The brother Romeo had mourned, had avenged by going to war with the Marchettis because Marco had whispered intelligence suggesting their involvement. All of it a lie. All of it orchestrated by the man Romeo had trusted more than anyone except Dante himself. The hit happens at 3 a.m., Marco continued, checking his watch. Romeo's security detail rotates at 2:45. 15-minute window. Sal's men will enter through the service elevator using the codes I provided. 2 shots, center mass. We stage it as a home invasion. Wrong place, wrong time. The Cobra dies in his own penthouse, and by sunrise, his empire gets divided among the families who were smart enough to back me. Sal Torino raised his glass. To evolution. To evolution, the others echoed. Romeo turned to Annabelle, his voice barely a whisper. Who are you? She met his gaze without flinching, and in her eyes, Romeo saw the truth he'd been too blind to notice. This woman was no maid. Never had been. Someone who's been watching Marco for 6 weeks, she said quietly. And someone who's about to show you exactly how deep this goes. Annabelle's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up folders organized with military precision. Each one bore a date and timestamp. 6 weeks of data, cataloged like evidence in a federal investigation. "My real name is Anna Bellamy," she said, her voice steady even as another monitor showed Marco's men taking positions throughout the building. "Former FBI Special Agent, Organized Crime Division. 3 years ago, I testified against the Sinaloa cartel's New York operations. My testimony put 16 men away for life, including a federal judge and 2 congressmen on their payroll." Romeo's mind struggled to reconcile the woman standing before him with the quiet maid who'd served his coffee without meeting his eyes for 6 months. Witness protection. Was supposed to be Seattle. New identity, new life, endless boredom. She pulled up a photograph. Herself in a suit, FBI credentials visible, her hair shorter and darker. The resemblance was unmistakable now that Romeo knew to look. But the cartel found me anyway. They always do. So I disappeared off the grid completely. No handlers, no check-ins, no federal oversight. Just me and survival instincts. A video file opened. Marco, shot from an elevated angle, meeting with Vincent Marchetti in a parking garage. Timestamp, 5 weeks ago. Their body language spoke of negotiation, of plans being laid. "I took the Maid position because invisible people see everything," Anna continued, opening another file. "I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to fold towels and cash paychecks until the cartel stopped hunting me. But then I noticed patterns." The next video showed Marco entering Romeo's study at 2 a.m., using a key he shouldn't have possessed. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. Marco opened Romeo's private safe, the one containing documents Romeo showed no one, and photographed papers with methodical precision. "Former agents don't stop being agents," Anna said quietly. "We just stop getting paid for it. I watched him accessing your accounts, redirecting shipments, meeting with men who should have been your enemies. At first, I thought maybe you knew. Maybe this was part of some strategy one didn't understand." Another video. Marco giving orders to Romeo's security team, reassigning rotations, creating gaps in coverage. The men followed without question, believing they served Romeo's interests. Then I heard him on the phone talking about Dante. Her voice softened. About how the break line was easier than expected. How Romeo never suspected. "And I realized you weren't the monster I assumed you were. You were the mark." Romeo stared at the screens, watching his empire unravel through 6 weeks of documented betrayal. Marco had been systematic, patient, thorough. Every piece positioned perfectly for tonight's checkmate. "Why didn't you go to the FBI?" Romeo asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because going to the FBI means entering their system again. Means the cartel finding me within 48 hours. Anna met his eyes. "And because I watched you grieve for Dante. I watched you at his grave every Sunday for 6 months, talking to a headstone like he could hear you. The man Marco described to those vultures in your living room isn't the man who lives here." The clock on the monitor read 12:47 a.m. 98 minutes until Marco's men came through that door. "So what now?" Romeo asked. Anna's smile was sharp as a blade. "Now I show you how to haunt your own house." The audio feed crackled as Marco poured himself Romeo's 30-year scotch. The bottle Romeo had been saving for the day his empire went fully legitimate. That day would never come now. "Gentlemen, I know some of you have concerns about my methods," Marco said, swirling the amber liquid in a crystal glass. "Particularly regarding Dante Castellano." Romeo's breath stopped. Anna's hand moved to his arm, but he barely felt it. Vincent Marchetti leaned forward. "You used us as the scapegoat. My family lost 6 men in Romeo's retaliation. Good men. Necessary casualties." Marco's tone held no remorse. Dante was becoming a problem. The kid spent 6 months talking Romeo into going legitimate, selling off the illegal operations, keeping only the clean businesses. He had spreadsheets, projections, even lawyer contacts. Romeo was actually listening. The panic room walls seemed to close in. Romeo remembered those conversations. Dante sitting at this very dining table with his laptop, eyes bright with possibility. "We could be something better, Romeo. Build something that doesn't require looking over our shoulders." Marco continued, his voice carrying the weight of calculated confession. "I couldn't let that happen. So I cut his brake lines, waited for the rain, and made sure he took the route past Marchetti territory. When the car went off the road, I fed Romeo intelligence, fabricated but convincing, that Marchetti soldiers were seen fleeing the scene." Romeo's vision blurred red. 3 years of grief weaponized. 3 years of believing Vincent's family had stolen his brother. The war that followed had been brutal. Romeo had personally executed 2 of Marchetti's captains, burned their warehouses, dismantled their operations piece by piece. Romeo went nuclear, exactly as I predicted, Marco said with something almost like pride. While he was busy destroying the Marchettis, I consolidated power within his organization, replaced his loyal soldiers with mine, gained access to everything. And the beautiful part? He trusted me more than ever because I stood beside him through his grief. Sal Torino chuckled darkly. The long game. The only game worth playing. Marco raised his glass. Dante's death gave me Romeo's complete faith and eliminated the one person who could have changed his mind about this life. 2 problems, 1 solution. Romeo moved before conscious thought registered. His hand reached for the panic room door, murder singing in his veins. He would kill them all. Every single one. Starting with Marco, whose death would take hours instead of seconds. Anna's arms locked around him from behind, her full weight leveraging against his momentum. For someone barely reaching his shoulder, her strength was shocking. Not like this, she hissed in his ear. He wants you to come through that door. Look. She forced his attention to the monitor, showing the hallway outside the living room. For men with automatic weapons, positioned where they'd have clean sight lines the moment Romeo entered. Marco's insurance policy. You storm in there, you die in 3 seconds, Anna said, her voice cutting through his rage. And Dante's real killer walks away. Every family in that room believes the Marchettis killed your brother. Only we know the truth. Romeo's breathing came in ragged gasps. Dante's face flashed through his memory. 23 years old, laughing at something stupid Romeo said, alive and full of dreams Romeo had failed to protect. He took everything, Romeo whispered. Not yet, Anna said firmly. He took the past. We still control what happens next. Anna pulled up a different interface, this one showing an organizational chart that made Romeo's stomach drop. His empire, mapped in digital detail, with names color-coded. Red for Marco's loyalists. Blue for Romeo's original men. Yellow for uncertain. The screen was drowning in red. 60%, Anna said, her fingers highlighting section after section. Your dock foreman? Marco's cousin, installed 8 months ago after your real foreman had a convenient heart attack. Your head of security? On Marco's payroll since last January. The accountant who handles your offshore transfers? Feeding Marco duplicate reports for a year. She opened a file folder thick with scanned documents. Romeo recognized his own signature on contracts he'd never seen, authorizing transfers he'd never approved. The forgeries were perfect. Even he couldn't spot the difference. He's been bleeding you dry in amounts small enough to hide in the noise of your operations, Anna explained, pulling up spreadsheet after spreadsheet. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. Over 2 years, he siphoned 47 million from your accounts into shell companies registered in the Caymans. Romeo's jaw clenched. 47 million. That was leverage, power, the ability to buy loyalty and fund a war. But that's not the beautiful part, Anna continued, opening another file. Marco's been doing the same thing to every family sitting in your living room. Bank records appeared, DeLuca's accounts, Marchetti's, Torino's, all showing the same pattern of small, consistent withdrawals routed through the same shell companies. Anna had highlighted the totals. 18 million from DeLuca, 22 from Marchetti, 15 from Torino. He's stolen from all of them while convincing each one that partnering with him was their smartest move, Anna said. They think they're dividing your empire. They have no idea Marco's planning to eliminate them next. Romeo stared at the evidence, his mind calculating possibilities. They'd turn on him if they knew. They would. Anna ejected a USB drive from the computer, holding it up like a talisman. Everything's on here. Financial records, forged documents, recordings of Marco admitting to the embezzlement. Even his plans for after tonight. There's an email draft detailing how he'll stage accidents for each family head within 6 months of taking over. The clock read 1:15 a.m. 90 minutes until the hit squad arrived. Romeo looked at the monitors, showing Marco's men positioned throughout his building. Not just the 4 in the hallway. There were 2 more in the lobby, 3 in the stairwells, another pair covering the service elevator. Marco hadn't left anything to chance. How do we get this to them without getting killed in the process? Romeo asked. Anna's smile was sharp and dangerous. We don't go to them. We make them come to us. But first, we need to reach your study. It has the only system in the building capable of broadcasting to every screen in this penthouse simultaneously. She pulled up a building schematic, routes marked in green through maintenance corridors and forgotten passages. These men know how Romeo Castellano moves. They're watching the obvious paths. So we move like ghosts, Romeo finished. Exactly like ghosts. The radio crackle came through the monitor's audio feed, cutting through Marco's conversation mid-sentence. Boss, we got a problem. Romeo's Maserati is in the garage. Engine's still warm. Marco's expression transformed in an instant, relaxed confidence shattering into cold calculation. He was on his feet before the transmission ended, gesturing sharply to his men. He's in the building. Lock it down. Now. The living room erupted into motion. Vincent and the other family heads drew weapons as Marco's soldiers flooded into the hallways, their synchronized movements revealing months of preparation. These weren't hired guns. They were a trained unit. Every floor, every room. Marco barked into his radio. He's wounded or hiding. Either way, he doesn't leave this building breathing. Anna was already moving, her fingers flying across the panic room's control panel. A section of the back wall slid open, revealing darkness and the smell of old concrete. Maintenance shaft. Goes down 3 floors before connecting to the original building infrastructure. Romeo hesitated at the threshold. His instinct screamed to fight, to take his Glock and end this the way he'd ended every threat for 15 years. But Anna's evidence, Dante's truth, the sheer scope of Marco's betrayal, it all demanded something more than bullets. Trust me, Anna said, reading his hesitation. She pulled a compact Sig Sauer from an ankle holster he hadn't known she carried. I've mapped every route in this building. Your architect hid more than you know. They descended into the shaft, Anna leading with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this exact escape. The metal ladder was slick with condensation, the air thick and stale. Above them, footsteps thundered. Marco's men checking the penthouse, their shouts echoing down through ductwork and walls. 3 floors down, Anna pushed open a grate and pulled Romeo into a corridor that shouldn't exist according to any blueprint. The walls were older here, brick instead of drywall. The architecture from the 1920s when the building had been a hotel for mob bosses who needed places to hide product and people. Prohibition tunnels, Anna whispered, moving through the darkness with barely a sound. Your building connects to 4 others in this block. The city forgot, but the walls remember. A door burst open somewhere behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, voices coordinating search patterns. Romeo and Anna pressed into an alcove barely wide enough for both of them, her body tight against his, both barely breathing as 2 of Marco's soldiers passed within arm's reach. Basement levels clear, one reported into his radio. Moving to sub-basement. Anna waited until their footsteps faded before moving again, leading Romeo through a maze of forgotten passages that smelled of dust and old secrets. They emerged into a service corridor 2 floors above the penthouse level, the executive floor where Romeo's private study overlooked the city. Through the study's frosted glass door, Romeo could see his desk, his computer, the broadcasting system that controlled every screen in his business empire. And standing between them and that door were 3 of Marco's best soldiers, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for exactly what was about to happen. Anna met Romeo's gaze in the dim light. Her message was clear. No more hiding. Together, she whispered. Romeo's hand found his Glock. Together. The passage narrowed until Romeo's shoulders brushed both walls. Anna pressed against his chest as they squeezed through a gap that led to the next corridor. Her breathing was controlled, steady. The kind that came from training, not luck. You don't have to do this, Romeo said quietly, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of Marco's men tearing through his building. You could have walked away the moment I came home. Let the FBI handle it. Let me die. Anna stopped moving, turning in the tight space until they were face to face in the darkness. Is that what you think? That I stayed because of duty? I think you're smart enough to know that helping a mafia boss survive the night isn't the move that keeps you breathing long term. Her laugh was soft and bitter. You still don't get it. You think your power comes from fear, from the bodies you've buried and the territory you control. That's what Marco thinks too. That strength is violence, that respect is just fear wearing a suit. Romeo's jaw tightened. That's how this world works. No, Anna said, her hand finding his in the darkness. That's how you've survived. There's a difference. Footsteps echoed somewhere close, too close. Anna pulled Romeo into a maintenance closet barely large enough for one person, let alone two. They pressed together in absolute stillness as flashlight beams swept past the crack beneath the door. Romeo could feel Anna's heartbeat against his chest, could smell the faint scent of lavender from the cleaning supplies she'd used to maintain her cover for 6 months. The soldiers passed. Anna didn't move immediately. "I've watched you for half a year," she whispered. "I've seen the man you show the world, the cobra, the killer, the boss everyone fears. But I've also seen you standing at Dante's grave every Sunday morning, talking to him like he's still listening, telling him about decisions you made that week, asking what he would have done differently." Romeo's throat tightened. Those cemetery visits were private, sacred. The idea that someone had witnessed them felt like exposure, like vulnerability he couldn't afford. "I've seen you stop to help Mrs. Chun on the 4th floor carry her groceries," Anna continued. "You didn't announce it, didn't make a show. You just did it because she reminded you of your mother. I've seen the photograph you keep in your desk drawer, the one of your mother in front of her restaurant before the cancer took her. You look at it when you think no one's watching. That doesn't change what I am," Romeo said roughly. "It changes what you could be." Anna pulled back enough to meet his eyes, even in the darkness. "Marco is what happens when violence becomes identity. You're what happens when violence becomes survival. One of those has a way out." Another shout echoed through the passages, closer now. They moved again, Anna leading through a shaft that climbed vertically toward the executive floors. Romeo's hands found rusted handholds, his body following paths Anna had mapped while the world thought she was just a maid folding his shirts. "Why?" he asked as they climbed. "Why risk everything for someone like me?" Anna paused on the ladder above him, looking down. "Because my sister died protecting a man who didn't deserve it. Maybe I'm helping you, because you still might." The study door was unlocked. Romeo's first warning that something was wrong. His second was the blinking red light on his computer system. The entire interface frozen behind a security lockout he'd never authorized. "Marco's tech guy," Anna breathed, already moving to the machine. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up command prompts that Romeo didn't recognize. "He's bricked the system remotely. I need 3 minutes to bypass." Romeo heard them before he saw them. Boots on marble, the deliberate pace of men who knew their target was cornered. 2 shadows appeared in the doorway, weapons rising. Romeo moved on instinct, 15 years of survival overriding thought. He caught the first man's wrist as the gun came up, redirecting the barrel toward the ceiling as it discharged. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Romeo's elbow drove into the man's throat, dropping him choking to the floor. The second assassin was faster, better trained. His fist caught Romeo's jaw, snapping his head sideways. They grappled, crashing into the bookshelf. Books rained down as Romeo took a knee to the ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Behind him, Anna's fingers never stopped typing, her voice calm despite the violence erupting 3 feet away. 2 minutes. The assassin had Romeo pinned, his forearm crushing Romeo's windpipe. Black spots bloomed in Romeo's vision. His hand scrabbled across the floor, finding the letter opener on his fallen desk. Solid brass, 8 inches long. He drove it into the man's thigh. The assassin screamed, his grip loosening just enough. Romeo surged upward, bringing his forehead into the man's nose with a crack of cartilage. The first attacker was recovering, reaching for his dropped weapon. The gunshot made Romeo flinch, but it wasn't aimed at him. The first assassin dropped, a perfect hole in his shoulder. Anna stood with her Sig Sauer extended, her shooting stance textbook perfect, before pivoting smoothly to cover the second man now clutching his bleeding leg. "FBI marksmanship qualifier, 6 years running," she said mildly. "Stay down or the next one center mass." The computer chimed. The lockout screen dissolved, replaced by Romeo's normal interface. Anna was already connecting the USB drive, pulling up the broadcast protocols that would send her evidence to every screen in the building. Romeo's radio, the one he'd taken from the first assassin, crackled to life. Marco's voice cold and certain. "He's in the study. Everyone converge. End this." Through the doorway, Romeo heard them coming. Not just soldiers, footsteps from multiple directions, the entire conspiracy moving as one. Anna met his eyes as the files began uploading. 30 seconds until broadcast. "We just need to survive that long." Romeo picked up the fallen pistol, checked the magazine. "Then let's give them a show worth watching." The footsteps grew louder. Marco's voice echoed down the hallway. Seal the exits. No one leaves that room alive. Anna's finger hovered over the enter key. The evidence was ready. The truth was loaded. All they needed was an audience. They came like a wave. Marco at the front, Vincent and the other family heads flanking him. A dozen armed men forming a semicircle that sealed every exit. Romeo stood behind his desk, Anna positioned where the shadows swallowed her completely, her presence invisible to the men flooding into the study. Marco's smile was the same one he'd worn at Dante's funeral. The cobra, finally cornered in his own den. There's poetry in that. Romeo said nothing, his hand resting on the desk's surface, inches from where Anna had left the broadcast controls hidden beneath scattered papers. You built an empire on old-world rules, Marco continued, circling slowly like he was delivering a eulogy. Loyalty, honor, blood before business. Beautiful principles, Romeo. Also dead ones. He gestured to the family heads watching with predatory interest. The modern underworld doesn't reward sentiment. It rewards evolution. And you refuse to evolve. Vincent Marchetti's gun never wavered from Romeo's chest. Any last words, Castellano? Just one question, Romeo said quietly. Marco, do you remember what Dante used to say about trust? Marco's expression flickered, the first crack in his performance. What? He said trust without verification is just faith wearing a blindfold. Romeo's finger found the broadcast button. I should have listened. Every screen in the study blazed to life simultaneously. The television mounted on the wall, the monitors on the desk, even the tablets Marco's soldiers carried. Anna's evidence flooded every display in synchronized accusation. Bank records appeared first, Marco's shell companies highlighted in red. The numbers were impossible to ignore. 47 million from Romeo, 18 from De Luca, 22 from Marchetti, 15 from Torino. Every family represented in this room, systematically robbed while Marco convinced them they were partners. What the hell is this? De Luca snarled, his weapon swinging toward Marco. The video evidence played next. Marco in the parking garage, promising Vincent he'd eliminate De Luca after the coup. Then Marco meeting with Torino, outlining how Marchetti would have an unfortunate accident within 6 months. Each promise of betrayal, each plan to eliminate his supposed allies, laid bare in Marco's own words. You're stealing from all of us, Vincent said, his voice dropping to something deadly, while pretending to unite us. This is fabricated. Marco started, but the final video cut him off. Marco's own confession about Dante recorded from tonight's meeting, his voice clear and proud. I cut his break lines. Framed the Marchettis. 2 problems, 1 solution. The study erupted. Accusations flew like bullets. Marco's soldiers found themselves surrounded by the very families they'd helped betray. Guns now pointed inward instead of at Romeo. Anna stepped from the shadows, her Sig Sauer trained on Marco's lieutenant. Everyone stays very still. Marco's eyes found Romeo across the chaos, understanding dawning. You were supposed to be dead. Romeo lifted his own weapon, the Glock that had ended so many threats, solved so many problems. 1 bullet would finish this. 1 trigger pull would give him everything 15 years of violence had taught him to take. But Dante's voice whispered in his memory. We could be something better. Romeo's hand steadied. His choice made, irreversible as a heartbeat. Romeo lowered his gun. The room held its breath, every man present understanding they were witnessing something impossible. The cobra choosing mercy over the kill. He's yours, Romeo said, looking at Vincent, at De Luca, at every family head Marco had stolen from. Your money. Your judgment. I'm just here to make sure he doesn't walk away. Marco's face drained of color as his former allies closed in. Vincent's smile was razor-sharp. We have a lot to discuss about those missing millions, Marco. Somewhere private. Somewhere you can explain yourself properly. The siren started as a distant wail, growing louder with each second. Anna's lips curved into something satisfied. I called my former handler the moment I saw Marco's meeting begin. Figured we might need insurance. You brought the feds into this? De Luca's voice held more respect than anger. I brought them for Marco and his evidence, Anna corrected. Mr. Castellano has information about criminal conspiracies he'd be willing to share in exchange for immunity and a clean exit. The FBI flooded the building with tactical precision. But by then the rival families had already melted into the night through exits only they knew, dragging Marco with them to face justice of a different kind. Romeo had just enough time to hand over the USB drive, to make his deal with agents who saw an opportunity too valuable to waste. 6 months later, Romeo Castellano signed a contract in a Manhattan boardroom while lawyers and investors watched with approval. His tattoos were visible above his collar, a reminder of what he'd been, but his signature authorized legitimate shipments, legal imports, business ventures that wouldn't end with blood on anyone's hands. Castellano Enterprises thrived. The docks he'd once used for smuggling now processed legal cargo. The warehouses that had hidden contraband now stored consumer goods. The money was cleaner, if smaller, and Romeo slept without checking shadows. Anna, openly herself now, no longer hiding behind a maid's uniform, stood beside him as his chief security officer, the woman whose instincts had saved his life and given him a second chance at living one. On Sunday morning, they visited Dante's grave together. The marble headstone was clean, flowers fresh, exactly as Romeo had maintained it for 3 years of grief built on lies. "I know the truth now," Romeo said quietly to the stone. "Marco took you from me, and I almost let him take who I could become, too." He paused, feeling Anna's hand slip into his. "I'm building something you'd be proud of, little brother. Something that lasts." As they walked away from the cemetery, Romeo understood what Dante had tried to teach him years ago. Some empires are built on fear and blood, but only those built on truth can last. The Cobra had learned to hide, had learned to kill, had learned every lesson the underworld offered. But Romeo, just Romeo now, had finally learned to live.